Well, thank you very much for staying. The UK general elections, what's happening there? With me in the studio is our own brother. Well, change has come. When he came, change hadn't come yet. Now change has really come. Dr. Ziblim Idi, who was a lecturer, and now he's, also an international relations analyst. But most importantly, Honorable Member of Parliament for Gushegu. Doc, you're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Change has definitely come.
Well, I don't know about that. Yes, sure.
And then, first time on the show, Leila Brea, who is a policy and developmental consultant at Law Development Associates.
Yes.
She's a first timer, so she owes us a bottle. You owe my viewers and I a bottle of drink. It's a fine for all first timers on the show, so we'll get it another day. And, we have Evans Mensah, we have Aisha Ibrahim, all at the back trying to coordinate with some of our correspondents in the UK to give us an in-depth of what's happening today, who's winning, who's losing, and all that. I will go to Dr. Ziblim. Doc, first of all, I want to ask, why should we even concern ourselves if the UK is running an election?
Well, thank you so much, and it's always great coming on this show.
Sure.
And, there's something fun. I think anytime I come here, it's a Thursday. I've been counting on that. But first of all, let me say a very good evening to your cherished viewers, and especially the good people of Gushegu constituency.
Deputy Minister for Tourism, the guy wears many hats.
So great. Let me say that I think for historical reason, the UK, the United Kingdom, of course, colonized this country, then the Gold Coast. And we, since gaining independence, have kept the ties between us and our former colonial masters for good reasons. First of all, the Commonwealth was in existence before Ghana became independent, and we joined the Commonwealth. And so we continue to be on the same platform with the UK at the international level, and we collaborate on so many levels under the Commonwealth. But most importantly, since independence, the United Kingdom has continued to be Ghana's largest trading partner. And for that reason, in terms of our international relations, we gravitate more towards the UK in supporting them. Yes.
Let me just interrupt you quickly, and then we're going on Skype to speak to Daniel Jackson, who's in the UK, to give us an update of what's happened with regards to the election. Do we have Daniel Jackson now?
Good evening.
Good evening, Daniel. Well, Daniel, how is it going in the UK? Exit polls out yet?
Yeah, so just 13 minutes ago, the exit poll came out, which is exactly the same time that polls closed here. And I was in for a bit of a shock, actually. Mm-hmm. So Theresa May called this election to try and increase her majority. Sure. And if this exit poll is correct, she's lost it. The exit poll the BBC have provided suggests that the Conservatives have 314 seats and Labour 266, which would be a major shock because people were expecting a Conservative majority.
So Labour actually increased their seats?
Significantly increased their seats, yes.
Wow. Now, one would then ask, with the UKIP and the other small parties, are they likely to go the Conservative way, or are they likely to go with Jeremy Corbyn on with Labour?
So the big assumption going into this election was that the UK Independence Party voters, who before the last election were in support of a referendum so they could leave the European Union, that they would, in this election, vote Conservative. And most polls suggested 2 out of 3 were moving Conservative, and that would give her a strong majority. But from this poll, I don't know which way they've gone. It suggests they might have split a bit more evenly between Conservatives and Labour.
How much of the security situations affected her vote, do you think? The Manchester and the London Bridge, and previously, just recently, cutting down the police force. Has it played an impact in the elections?
Well, it's hard to tell at this point, but it has certainly contributed for this being quite a strange election period. This was an election that we didn't expect. We're supposed to have them every 5 years. We had one in just 2015. And then we've had these two attacks in Manchester and London Bridge, where campaigning's had to be suspended. And we've got a national conversation about the election at the same time as national mourning. And I don't know how it's played out. Traditionally, you'd expect that when security or crime is a bigger issue, that would benefit the Conservatives. They're traditionally seen as the party of law and order. But like you mentioned, the issue of police cuts and security cuts was the kind of counter message of the Labour Party, because Theresa May, the Prime Minister, was Home Secretary before being Prime Minister from 2010 till 2015. And she did get a degree of blame for the attacks. So it's possible that may have influenced it, but I kind of don't want to say either way at this point.
How did Jeremy Corbyn turn his fortunes around? Because at one point, most of his, party stalwarts were leaving the party. They really didn't want to associate. Tony Blair said he was not winning material. So how did he turn his fortunes around to, become a game player?
So I think it's probably a combination of him being very much underestimated. When all the media in a country is saying somebody is not capable, their own MPs are threatening to resign and things, then when people see him on TV and they think, oh, he seems fairly reasonable, that can change things. But I also think this is down to Theresa May as well. I think if it was 2-0 to the Conservatives at half-time, to get this to a near draw, it's meant probably 1 goal for Jeremy Corbyn and an own goal for Theresa May. She's been very poor throughout this campaign. Her manifesto was poorly received, and her public performances have shown her very shaky in public, and people hadn't really seen much of her before. So I think that kind of mixture of Jeremy Corbyn exceeding expectations and Theresa May doing the opposite is probably what explains these results.
How about not showing up for the big debate? You think voters were a bit upset?
I think it contributed to a narrative of her being afraid to meet the public. Absolutely. David Cameron did the same. He didn't turn up to the debates, but people didn't think that was because he wasn't afraid, or he was afraid. So I think that would have contributed to it. Absolutely, yeah.
So what's going to be of a Brexit now? I mean, is it going to be delayed or still going according to plan?
Oh, I don't know at this point. I think it's not going to be as simple. She called this election so she would have a big mandate to take some very tough decisions. Currently, the negotiating position between Britain and the EU is stuck because the European Union says that before we have any negotiations about trade, we need to agree the divorce bill. So that's how much the UK pays the other 27 countries for us to leave. And that is massively unpopular back home. And Theresa May knows that. And that's why I think she called this election so that she could have 5 years to take some tough decisions. If she doesn't have that majority, if she has her own backbenchers, potentially looking to, it's not impossible that they will replace her as party leader in the next few years, anything's possible.
Wow.
But I should say these are just the exit polls. They haven't been wrong since 1992, but they were wrong in 1992.
Wait and see. And Daniel, if anything at all, I'm sure we'll come back to you and find out what's going on.
Great to talk to you.
Great talking to you too, Daniel Jackson. Dr. Edie, sorry, we were in the mid-flow while we brought you in there, but mainly finding out what the significance of us concerning ourselves, giving a bit of history there.
Oh, great. I think it's good that we went out there, and because these are the latest exit polls we are getting from the UK. And even though it's shocking, I don't think it's unexpected. But let me come back to what I was explaining. So I said that historically, yes, because we're colonized by the UK, but also in international relations, our membership in the Commonwealth has actually put us, side by side the UK. And so we have so much that we deal with at that level. But also, I mentioned trade, that the UK is our biggest trading partner. And along with that, they actually, they are not leading in that area in terms of development, but they help a lot. So they are one of our biggest development partners. But most importantly, I think for ordinary Ghanaian citizens, we have a large population of our citizens in the UK because, of course, the historical. We had a visa-free, relationship with the UK, and so Ghanaians could travel there and back and forth. And we had a lot of scholarships in the early days. So there's a large Ghanaian community. Actually, some people run into millions in the UK. And so for that, we are very much interested in what goes on there. If things goes on well, it's good for our citizens. And so I think that we should be interested in what goes on there. And if not for anything, our diplomatic relationship with the United Kingdom, we always say that international relations or in foreign policy, it doesn't matter whether it's the Conservatives or the Labour Party, will continue to be the same. But we want it to be a strong and stable country so that they will continue to support us in ways that we also want to grow out of where we are today.
Good. Leila, are you Conservative or are you Labour?
I don't belong to any political party.
No?
No.
Oh. How can you be Ghanaian and not support a political party?
I don't belong to a political party. But I'm neutral.
Are you equally shocked? Did you expect that the Conservatives were going to increase their seats?
I think to be totally contradictory, I'm both not surprised and surprised at the same time. Definitely Corbyn has run a much better campaign than was initially expected. You mentioned the issues that he's had in terms of his own party leadership and the lack of confidence in him. So, but in the last few weeks, he's surprised many. I think he's appealed to the youth as well. This kind of anti-establishment rhetoric that we've been seeing, not just in England, but across Europe and in the States as well, has gone down quite well with some constituents. I feel with some others, perhaps it's bordering on this kind of revolutionary rhetoric that scares some people. But he's surprised many with his confidence in public speaking, his ease, he's generally just the opposite of what Theresa May has been exhibiting over recent weeks. And like you say, the reason why she called this election was because she was far ahead in the polls, the margins were wide. You don't call an election a snap election unless you expect to win, and win big as well. So not surprised in the sense that these are challenging times, and there will be challenging times ahead going into these Brexit talks and Brexit negotiations. So on the other hand, I feel that maybe there's an element of the British people wanting that sense of stability, that sense of, okay, well, you've steered us into this, steer us through it as well, and maybe you are the stronger party, the stronger candidate to lead us through successfully. So I'm surprised and not at the same
time. Before the snap elections, the Conservatives had 330 seats, and then now they dropped down to 314. If the polls are right, they're dropping down to 314. Labour had 229, and they're going up to 266. And as we are saying that it's a good one though. So imagine you are in Ghana and something bad really happens. Let's say bad happens, that the party majority will call for elections immediately there and then try and gain more seats. But as Daniel was saying, now they have to make really, really strong decisions with regards to Brexit. There's so much to do. And as you are losing your seats, I mean, that's going to be a hell of a government for Theresa May.
Yeah, I think we will really have difficult days ahead for the UK, because the European partners, the other European partners, are really not happy about Brexit. And they were ready to go to war. I mean, not literally, but in terms of the negotiations. And so Theresa May called this elections to strengthen her hand, you know, to give her, there's this sense of if you have the support, especially overwhelming mandate of your people, you go out there and you speak with strong knowing that your nation is behind you. That was the very reason why she called this election. Unfortunately for her and for the United Kingdom, she's coming out, you know, more damaged and looking more weaker, and I think it's not good for the UK. I'm not sure if they can go back on Brexit. Internationally, there are some regulations, there are some laws that binds them to whatever that referendum came out with. So they have to go on. And I think, you know, France and Germany and other European countries are probably smiling and laughing, you know, at what is going on now. But let's wait and see if, yes, these are just exit polls, what the final outcome would be, and if she is able to at least form a coalition government that may give her a sense of legitimacy, because that's very important. If she doesn't have that overwhelming mandate, at least she should have legitimacy, and that will at least put her in a position where she can go out and negotiate from a position of strength. You know, you don't want to go out there and you are looking behind and you are not sure whether, you know, your country is with you. It's sad, and I think, you know, I'm not sure if I agree with our friend out there. I think it was more of the question of Theresa May being a victim of circumstances and Corbyn benefiting from circumstances. I think if the two events of Manchester and London Bridge didn't happen, we probably were talking about different outcomes today.
Later, in these times when, you know, terrorism seems to be just a bit too frequent, I know as a leader you would have to cut corners somewhere, and, you know, which one do you cut? But, you know, cutting police and cutting security was it's risky. I don't know. You know, I don't know. Someone will say, well, so where do you cut? You know, you can't cut agriculture, education, you dare not touch. Health is tricky, you know, so the police becomes an obvious one. But that's a tricky one in terms of political decision. I mean, you're a policymaker, so what would you have advised?
Well, I think definitely, I think it must be said firstly that the cuts that were made to police weren't in this time that we're talking about now. That happened before when she was Home Secretary, so the situation was slightly different. But ever since Conservatives have come into government, it's been austerity. So austerity has been the order of the day. Cuts have been
brutal.
frequent.
I mean, brutal.
Definitely, and it's not just in policing, it's in healthcare, it's in education. I mean, I was just reading just recently that even nurses are going to food banks. That's a big deal. I mean, we talk about poverty, and obviously poverty is relative, so it might be difficult to appreciate the kind of poverty that we might see in the UK, but the situation has been very difficult for a lot of people. So austerity has hit people hard, and I think that's probably another reason why Tories have suffered in this regard, because you would recall about a week or 2 weeks ago, around the time that the Tories launched their manifesto and this whole dementia tax. I think another reason is that it's like Conservatives have almost attacked the very base, their constituents. I don't know if you understand it. It's like your core constituents, the elderly, the homeowners, those trying to get onto the property ladder. Your policies are not favourable, and I think maybe that's where Corbyn has tried to capitalise on that and has come out a little bit better.
I was in the UK and I went to interview the mayor of Harrow. Actually, when I was interviewing her, she was just the immediate
That's my constituency.
She was the immediate past mayor of Harrow. And she said, Nana, you know, at one time we submitted our budget, and when they brought it, it was £75 million short. And they told you, don't touch education, go. So, you know, they had to clean like, you know, every other day. You know, some of the police stations will shut at 5 o'clock. You know, well, I'll leave you to continue.
No, I mean, we were just discussing this before we came on, that there are schools in England that, just outside of London, in Greater London, that have written to parents asking them to contribute, whether it's £10 or however much they can afford, to buy basic supplies, toilet paper. this is a big deal. The cuts in education are so bad that parents are actually being asked to contribute. I mean, it doesn't sound like something that you would experience in the United Kingdom. It should not happen in the United Kingdom. But the cuts, such a great extent have these cuts been that schools are suffering.
I mean, look, when I was speaking to the mayor, she said they had a clear order not to touch education. And they, but the budget was 75 million short. So they were now sharing hospital with Watford. They were cleaning every other day. Police station, instead of 24 hours, will close at 5, and then you move to South Arrow Police Station if you had an issue. I mean, it was just brutal. If you were position that came with a driver, you drive to work yourself. If you had 2 secretaries, you're down to, I mean, it was just austerity.
Yeah.
You know, I was telling somebody yesterday about the elections that if Manchester and London Bridge didn't happen, these elections, at least for once, would have been one election that you have two clear choices. A far right wing candidate and a far left wing candidate. Neither of them is in the middle. And so with May, you understand?
I don't agree.
You don't agree? Okay, you land and then you come.
So I'll explain. So with May, all these cuts are purely conservative ideology, trying to save money for big businesses, big industries, without taking care of what somebody will call the little guys. What didn't work for him was that ideologically, once again, the conservatives are supposed to be strong on security. So much as they are cutting on welfare, cutting on education, cutting on health, they normally invest in security. She didn't do that. And I think that happened, you can answer that as her Waterloo, because then she was campaigning on being strong and stable UK, only for London Bridge to happen, only for Manchester to happen. So it failed her. On the flip side, you come to Corbyn, and all the things that he's talking about are very far left, without regard to whether the economy can support them or not. And so you see, globally, more and more politicians are getting to the center right, center left. But in these elections, you didn't have that clear, you didn't have that. And so I think that if we had a Cameron, David Cameron, probably, running the campaign for the Conservatives, I don't think we'll get these results. Because then he had a way of reaching out to the middle and getting a support base and drawing from there, but also speaking strong and making sure that he keeps Britain strong and stable. Theresa May coming in, and she has experience too. She came to Parliament in 1997. And so 20 years in Parliament should give her enough experience, both domestically and international, to be able to run a good campaign. But I think she failed her party. Yes, the circumstances were not good, but if she was a strong leader and a strong politician in terms of campaigning, I think she could have get out of this. Because look, Corbyn was not even looking good. There were issues raised about him, his past and his comments with the IRA and him not coming strong, to condemn and all. So even on that score, he wasn't looking that good. But she couldn't capitalize on it because of her own internal, weaknesses in campaigning. And so, well, we'll see. Again, exit polls are exit polls. Let's wait and see what the results are. I will really be shocked if, it stays the way it is. I know, the gap will widen, but not this much.
So, Lila, I'll bring you in, but we still have Daniel Jackson on Skype. Daniel. Hello, Daniel. Have we still got Daniel? Okay, then let me come to Lila. Let me get your comment.
So I was about to say that I disagree, but he mentioned something. Doc, you said that you mentioned parties being in the centre, either centre left or centre right. I agree. I think very few parties in this day and age are pure left or pure right. Everyone is in the centre, and just depends that inch or two that you lean either way. But you mentioned that the Tories have, if you like, failed on their promise, if you like. Theresa May's first speech as Prime Minister, she mentioned it was a very unifying speech. she mentioned that the Tories would be a party for all, focused on the vulnerable, the needy, the working class, which is very, very Labour, very left-wing, very socialist, exactly. But I think they failed to do that. They failed to live up to their core promise, and I think Corbyn, in that sense, has he's maybe filled some of those grey areas. But I think he's equally has been ambiguous in terms of how he's going to fund some of his core policies. He says he'll put 10,000 police back on the streets. We all saw what happened with Diane Abbott, but I think at the core there's maybe that lack of real understanding as to how some of these things will be funded. So you mentioned security. Community police officers were part of those that were removed, and I think there was a debate as to whether how influential the 20,000 police taken off the streets would have been if, for example, in averting terrorist attacks like what we saw in Manchester and London Bridge. But there's also an argument to be had that those community police officers, they are on the doorstep of the communities. They know them, they are familiar with the people, and I think that's a first point of call. If you can imagine just walking down your local high street and seeing a local police officer and you know their name, he knows your name or she knows your name, that familiarity. So if something is wrong in your community, if you suspect something, that would be your first point of contact. And once you've removed that, then you've removed that first line of defense. So I think it's probably hard to say that it didn't have an impact. As to the extent, it's hard to tell, but I think probably it did have some impacts.
Sorry. Have I got Daniel?
Hello?
Hi, Daniel. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, Daniel, the doctor raised an issue here, and I just want to run it past you. And he said that, had it not been the bombing, voters would have had a clear, two clear decisions to make, whether you're voting to the left or voting to the right. But the bombing just sort of messed things up, and you don't know whether you are voting middle, left, right, center. I mean, what do you say to that?
I think there's a degree of truth in that Theresa May was trying to make this election another referendum on Brexit. And the choice she wanted to offer was her strong and stable leadership to negotiate Brexit versus the coalition of chaos, which would be Labour and other parties forming a coalition. And the terrorist attacks meant that the election became about a lot of other things, whether that was terrorism or the changes to social care that went down very badly. She lost control of the story, lost control of the narrative, and they contributed to that. One thing I've just picked up, which I think may be of interest, is that if the numbers are right on this exit poll, which we're not sure of yet, then it is possible for Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister in a coalition with the Scottish National Party and the Lib Dems, which would get the exact same number of seats, 314, as the Conservatives.
Well, if it's 314, how does Jeremy Corbyn get the de facto Prime Minister?
Well, there's calls already for Theresa May to resign. She asked for the vote to be a confidence in her, and she's lost confidence to some extent. The process is that she has to, the palace gets involved, and she has to say that she can form a government, and if that's a minority government, she needs to have a vote through Parliament, a vote of confidence. But if for whatever reason that fails, it's possible that it goes the other way, but it gets very complicated.
It does get complicated. But another thing Layla raised in studio was that, Corbyn is making a lot of promises, but has he got the money to back all these promises, or is this the usual political rhetoric?
Well, that's true. The spending commitments in the Labour manifesto were immense. Things like free tuition fees, free education at university for everyone, including people starting from September of this year with their fees back paid. And where the money's coming from for all of this is taxing the very wealthiest. So people earning more than £80,000 a year And one thing we know about raising taxes on the wealthy and on businesses is that it's not always guaranteed, because they can move elsewhere, they can pay very expensive accountants to dodge it. So I think that is a legitimate concern. You could maybe raise the money one year, but then everyone dodges it the next year. And yeah, I think that's certainly a legitimate concern.
Daniel, but I mean, can the UK take any more taxes? Because I mean, the average, you're very heavily taxed. I mean, is there any room for more taxing?
Well, we have lower levels of taxation than countries like Sweden or Norway or France. But, there's always the question is what happens when you raise taxes? We increased our top rate of tax from 45p to 50p, so that's 50% taxation. And the revenue that was received after that was not huge because people found other ways to earn their income.
Wow. Let me come to studio. The issue of taxing. I mean, there's just too much taxes in the UK.
A lot of taxes.
I mean, I think even Alan Sugar's left.
A lot of taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always an issue of contention. But it's funny, I had a conversation with a cousin of mine just yesterday, and she is in that bracket that Daniel speaks about. She does earn over a certain amount, and she said something that was quite profound.
Hello.
She said that if you're doing okay for yourself, you should still vote for a better Britain for somebody else. So even if that means that she has to pay more in taxes, she'll be willing to do that because she honestly thinks that a lot of people are suffering, and she would rather pay more in taxes to help somebody else than pay less and be okay all by herself. I think that was quite a profound thing to say.
It is, isn't it?
And it's not common. Let's say it like
it's nearly biblical.
I would just like to say also, I think pollsters should just pack up and go home, because it's like they've got it wrong. If this indeed does turn out, it's like they've got it wrong on every occasion. They Brexit, Trump, it's wrong.
We're going to go take a short break. I think this is the year of the pollsters getting it wrong here. Let's wait and see. They're taking a quick break, and we are coming back. Don't move.
You didn't mention Ghana.
Well, in Akan, they said if you're not dead, you never know your end. So just keep fighting on once you are alive. We're looking at the UK general elections, and just things are happening. But let me go to Skype and see if I still have Daniel. Daniel, have I still got you?
Hello.
Yeah, Daniel, have we got voter turnout? What was the voter turnout?
We have only got the first few seats reporting.
Okay.
And what we've got is Sunderland South, which historically is the first to report, and they're very proud about that. And the turnout is 61%, which is up from 56.6% in 2015. So that's suggesting a relatively significant increase in turnout.
But did Sunderland beat their last record in terms of timing? How long before they declared their results?
I'm not sure. They're all rushing around with their boxes and their counting. But yeah, usually they do it within the hour. So 15 minutes, we should have an idea of how that's changed in 2015.
61% is not bad. It's not bad.
For an area like Sunderland, that's very good.
Yeah, not bad turnout. Anyway, Daniel, thank you very much for that.
Great.
Thank you for joining the show. That was Daniel Jackson, who's a political analyst, joining the show from the UK. The power of the internet. But since we're talking about the power of internet, let's look at the power of social media. Leila, how much of social media has worked here? Because the youth now, work with social media rather than the usual traditional rallies.
I think it's been huge for Corbyn. I think it's contributed a lot to his recent increase in popularity, especially amongst the youth. I mean, there are musicians, artists, on social media, you know, urging their followers to go out and to vote, giving, you know, free giveaways and things like that. Corbyn has even been going to raves, what we'd call raves in the UK, which is basically parties or clubs. Do you know what I mean? He's in there with the youth. He's familiar. So it's been huge for him. That support has been huge.
Okay. Doc, if Corbyn was to become, you know, the Prime Minister, I mean, the whole game changes, isn't it?
Of course, yes. But in terms of international policy, I mean, there are foreign policy, not much.
Okay.
But there's little you can do in changing, I mean, in terms of like a paradigm shift, that it won't be. It will stay Brexit. They will still want to push along that lines, albeit maybe slowly, not pushing it as fast as the Conservatives would have liked. But from the way things are looking, it looks like even if Corbyn was to be the leader, it will be a coalition government. And coalition governments are always not active in pushing things because they are being pulled back by members of the coalition. And so it will be very difficult times for the UK. If neither party is getting a clear majority and they have to go into coalition with any other small party, it's really bad for the UK, especially domestically. A lot of policies, domestic policies, are either center-right or center-left, and all the small parties have their own, you know, ideologies in the way they think, and so it's not good if it happens. Either way you look at it, the outcome of this election will weaken the United Kingdom, at least as far as the Brexit negotiations is concerned. You need a clear mandate, you know, to go out there and negotiate, and to appreciate that was the basis of these elections. You even appreciate it more. Unfortunately, they are not going to come out. Even if Corbyn comes up, he's not going to be as strong as he would like to be. Let me just say, coming back to the question of the youth, what it reminds you about Obama's first election, that Obama literally wrote on the back of the youth, and the social media, and, you know, galvanizing, you know, support base from, you know, the entertainment industry and all of that. And that is exactly what is working for Corbyn. The fear with, you know, the Labour Party was whether they can get a high turnout. And what he just said, in the Western world, people don't go out to vote. And to get 60%, that's huge. I know it may not be across board, but it's huge.
I mean, we've only seen one constituency, but I think there was always this belief that if voter turnout was high and the youth went out to vote, then we would see perhaps a shift in the numbers. And Corbyn has been able to connect to the youth in a way that Theresa May hasn't. She comes across as quite...
I mean, he's not trendy looking, no.
No, but he has that... the rhetoric, you know, like I said, he's anti-establishment, he's for human rights, he's for justice, he's for you know, anti-racism. He talks about the issues that are relevant to people, and youth especially. There's this whole culture in the UK, we call it grime culture, and you know, these young black boys are, you know, pro-Corbyn. They're asking their voters to go out and vote. He appeals to them. He has an appeal that Theresa May just doesn't have.
I mean, the issue of black, you know, the borders, you know, everybody has this idea that, you know, Theresa May will be more stricter on the borders than Jeremy would. I mean, does that show a bit more black votes? Say, hey, you know, this guy's going more liberal on the borders. My cousins could come in. Let's go
Immigration.
Immigration.
I mean, immigration, I think it's a key issue. I'm not sure that black people are any more prone to, you know, they're more pro-immigration because of their cousins back home. but I think generally, I think Labour have probably learned from the past in terms of immigration. So I think everyone is a bit more sceptical now in terms of how freedom of movement is important, yes, but it should be tempered, it should be measured.
No, I was just going to say that Corbyn actually, you know, throughout his political, you know, life has been a populist. And so it's not just rhetoric, it's actually populist rhetoric. And that galvanized not just
but is that a new trend now? Because
if you really want, elections is about numbers. That's what it is. And if you have a way of reaching out to them, actually promising them the moon, and that was basically what he was doing. A lot of the things that he promised, there's no way he can't, deliver them. but that gets people around you, and they gravitate more towards you. He started his political life as a labor activist, and so right from there he had a constituency, and he has built on that constituency. Even throughout the days of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, he was a maverick, standing up against their center-left policies. A rebel, in another sense. So he has built a constituency for himself, and I think the time is just ripe for him to exploit the advantages of that constituency, and that's what we see. Populism.
It's the name of the game now. I mean, Donald Trump. I'll build a wall. I'll build a wall. So I think.
Sorry. I think it's probably safe to say, perhaps, that whatever the outcome of this evening's results, may well be Theresa May's last election. Either way you look at it,
I think
I don't really see her. I don't really see her
going beyond this one.
I think going back to the exit of David Cameron and her coming in, and the transition and what happened, even within the Conservative Party, it was clear that she wasn't actually their clear favorite, but the circumstances pushed other candidates out, and she came in. And so I think it's just maybe an opportunity for somebody to come in. The Foreign Affairs Minister, the former mayor of London, Boris
Johnson.
Yeah, he has his baggage, but he seems to be a little bit more.
You think he can be the next leader?
I reserve.
Well, he has his baggage, but if Theresa May cannot hold on, and they all, I think, stood back because they thought maybe she could take them out of. This Brexit, negotiations.
If they're already calling for his resignation, then he's losing that support. I mean, how can you go?
So fast.
How do you go even ask for coalition when your guys are asking you to leave?
It's just happening so fast, and we can't wait to see what tomorrow will bring. Because if it really happens that it stays the way it is, and there is pressure for her to resign, I think the Conservative Party will have a lot to do in order to get back. If they can't even hold on in terms of leadership, and they have to go through internal leadership, it's really bad for them. So it's going to be very bad.
So it's actually a disaster.
Yeah.
This whole experiment, if it turns out the way maybe we think it's going, it's completely backfired. You don't call a snap election for this to happen.
For us in Ghana, let me reiterate that, Nana, that it doesn't really matter whether the Labour Party or the Conservative Party will continue to build our strong relationship with the UK and continue to explore the benefits of that relationship. And we wish them well, but in the end, as I indicated, everywhere in the world, domestic elections does not necessarily, they do somehow impact on foreign policy, but not really much, especially in terms of relationship with developing countries like Ghana. So in terms of their soft power, they will continue to exercise it in ways that will benefit us in this relationship. Maybe hard power, they may have problems because you need really strong mandates. You need to have the people behind you to be able to go out and call for, exercise of hard power. But in terms of soft power, development aid, trade, and all of that, nothing will really change. And so Ghanaians should
We're going to go for an extension, but we didn't get the feed from Major Mahama's vigil, so we'll end at our usual time. But before we go, just 1 minute, I'll go back to Dr. Zebulon. When are we going to get to the UK where the voting is just free? You're driving, you stop, you vote, you go, and are we ever going to get there? Or are we always going to queue up and,
Well, I think they do queue up there too. They do queue up, but not
in the busy areas. But generally, there are no queues. You're driving, you vote, you sit in your car, you go to work, or on your way back from work, you stop, you vote, and you go home.
we are getting there. I voted in 92, and I know you probably also voted in 92. And so going back to 92 and where we are in terms of the 2016 elections, I think we'll get there. I would, of course, yes, be happy if we can be very, fast in the way we churn out the results. The last elections, I think the MPP did well in the results collation. So if the Electoral Commission can do better, so that the results are not delayed unduly. But in terms of queuing up, yeah, everywhere in the world people queue up to vote. Yes.
Well, it's been a nice, relaxing conversation and education as to how the UK elections and how their governments are run. We heard of snap elections. That will be that won't survive in Ghana. Snap elections won't survive in Ghana. Well, that's like a by-election, but without by-election, maybe the demise of somebody, and then you have to go and vote. But this is where nothing has happened. The ruling government just sees that I'm gaining a bit more popularity. Let me call for elections now and win a bit more seats. That would be the day in Ghana. That would be the day. But I want to say thank you very much to Leila Breya and our good old doctor, Honorable Member of Parliament for Kushegu. Doc, yes. Thank you very much, Leila. Thank you very much. And to you at home, tomorrow we'll be back to do this all over again. And tomorrow we're talking to Gabriel Hailey, who's a UN Aid Country Director, has a beautiful story to tell. Stay tuned.